Australian socialism is such an important part of who we are as a people. It was there at the very foundation of our nation. The famous Australian writer Henry Lawson was a fierce proponent of socialism in his writing and in his behaviour and his actions. I think it was his brother-in-law Jack Lang. Jack became Premier of New South Wales, and his most famous act was to attempt to repudiate English debt, to not pay back loans in order to protect families, working families in New South Wales. Sheep shearers around the fire in regional Queensland at the end of the 1800s were reading the Communist Manifesto and radical socialist literature. Indeed, at the start of the 20th century, in Queensland we had the first ever socialist government in the world elected. While the Australian Labor Party may have moved away from socialism over the course of its existence, socialism remained strong well up until after the Second World War. Indeed, in Queensland, Australia's only ever socialist parliamentarian was elected. Fred Paterson was elected to represent the seat of Bowen in 1944, and he was a fervent communist, and his story is an amazing one of representing marginalised groups in the community, standing up for workers, until of course he was tragically beaten by police. But you really need to understand all of this to get a picture of the rich history of socialism in Australian politics and indeed in Australian life. Of course, the Labor Party abandoned socialism in the 1980s and 90s under Hawke and Keating and moved to a more market-based neoliberal policy basis on which it still exists today. However, I believe in the 2022 Australian election we saw socialism emerging again. First in the election of socialist candidates within the Australian Greens, and also with socialist candidates doing quite well in some polling booths for Socialist Alliance and the Victorian Socialists. And I think this is very promising, and I think socialism must emerge if we are to become that nation of a fair go, that nation of equity and equality to which we once espoused. So I hope Australian socialism is making a comeback, and indeed I want you to be a part of that. So consider how you can be involved as an Australian in advancing the cause of socialism, whether it's in a minor party like Socialist Alliance or one of the other left parties, or through the Australian Greens, or supporting socialist candidates where you live. Australian socialism, let's make it our future.